You're listening to Systemic Error Podcast. The failure was designed.
White House insiders reveal the next Trump whisper after Lindsey Graham's death. Report based on an article by Robert Davis. A Senate built for compliance. A death reduced to staffing. The report says Lindsey Graham died suddenly, after a brief illness, and the immediate White House reaction was not reflection, but replacement planning. That is the whole moral logic of this political class. A senator's disappearance is treated as an operational problem for the administration, not a public rupture. The real center of power, the people with actual leverage in this story, are not the dead senator and not the voters who are expected to endure the consequences. It is the White House insiders, senior Republican advisors, and Senate power brokers who treat the legislature as an extension of the executive's will. Graham's value in this telling was never deliberation or democratic constraint. It was mediation. That is what liaison means in Washington when stripped of its varnish. Not accountability, but translation for power. Graham's job was to make Trump's agenda easier to absorb inside the Senate, to smooth the friction between authoritarian impulse and institutional procedure. Praise for the enablers. The most revealing line in the report is the praise for Graham as someone who spoke Trump more fluently than anyone in the Senate. That is not a compliment to democratic statesmanship. It is an admission that the Senate has been trained to reward the people best able to launder one man's will through a supposedly co-equal branch of government. The article's frame also does a familiar trick. It centers personality and succession gossip, then hides the larger reality that Republican governance depends on reliable enablers. The question is not which senator can fill a void. The question is why the void exists at all, and why the party treats a compliant broker as an irreplaceable institutional asset. Misdirection by design. This kind of coverage mistakes consequence for confusion. It presents the search for a new Trump whisper as a practical political puzzle, when it is really evidence of how normalized submission has become. The names floated as possible successors are less important than the system that produces them. A Senate environment where proximity to Trump is treated as merit and where ideological loyalty is mistaken for legislative skill. That is the misdirection. The public is invited to watch personnel churn while the machinery stays intact. The pattern beneath the story. The larger pattern is simple. Republican institutions no longer just tolerate Trumpism, they organize themselves around it. The Senate is not resisting executive domination. It is staffing for it. When a senator's most prized function is to make the administration's agenda go down easier, democracy is already operating on a severe discount. Systemic error. This story is not about grief. It is about an elite governing culture that measures people by their usefulness to power and calls it governance. A healthy democratic coalition would ask why so much institutional energy is spent finding the next compliant intermediary instead of building real constraint. Instead, the system keeps rewarding the same failure, obedience dressed up as statesmanship. You've been listening to Systemic Error. Thanks to Raw Story for today's article. With the automated voice of Leibritz, our thanks for listening.